Part 1, A Peaceful Afternoon at the Last of Spring. The afternoon of the 11th of May 1985 in Bradford was cool and the sunlight shining down on Valley Parade, casting a warm golden layer over the rows of old brown brick buildings of the industrial city in the north of England. That day, no one thought they were entering one of the darkest days in the history of English football. The final match of the season, Bradford City versus Lincoln City, was the day that thousands of people were waiting for, because this was also the day that the third division championship trophy was awarded to Bradford after many years of disappointment. A festive atmosphere spread throughout the city. Red and yellow flags fluttered in the hands of every child. The bars around the stadium were packed with people. Laughter mixed with the sound of clinking glasses and loud music from the old speakers. The stream of people poured into the stadium like a stream of excitement. Valley Parade, though old, was still the heart of Bradford. But the heart was actually sick. In the main stand where the disaster would strike the wooden benches were more than half a century old, so old, dry, and rotten that the mere touch of a hand would see the dust flake off like ash. The wooden floor rested on a rusted steel frame, and below lay a dark void of who knew what. Yet no one cared. Football was not a place where people thought about danger. It was a place where people sought relief after a long week of work in noisy factories and thick coal smoke. All people thought was a beautiful afternoon, a cup waiting to be lifted, and a city drunk with pride. Fans sat close together in the old stands, shoulder to shoulder, feet to feet. Children wearing red and yellow scarves ran around the benches looking for the best seats. Old men tuned their small radios, finding the familiar frequency to listen to the commentary. Middle-aged men discussed the season, the future of the team, and lit a cigarette, something so commonplace that no one thought it could be dangerous. Below them, beneath the faded wood of the stands, years of rubbish had accumulated. Newspapers, beer cans, plastic bags, rags, even old gloves and biscuit tins. No one had cleared them. No one had checked. The wind from both sides blew them into dark corners, piling them up like an invisible landfill. It was what would later be called a bomb waiting to explode. But at the moment, the afternoon was still too beautiful for anyone to think anything bad would happen. The sunlight shone on the championship trophy set up on the sidelines. Bradford's players ran to warm up to cheers. A security guard stood against the wall, sipping hot tea, unaware that in less than half an hour he would be running toward the stands, which were burning like a row of wooden houses. And the men who had just lit their cigarettes had no idea that a small spark could turn the sky crimson. The afternoon was so peaceful, so beautiful, so perfect, that it made the impending tragedy all the more cruel. Part 2, The First Fire. At around 3:40 p.m., everything was going on as normal. On the field, the game paused when the ball went out of play. In the stands, some people began to look down at their feet because they felt hotter than usual. A fan stood up, bent down to the gap in the wooden floor, and saw something smoldering. He quickly ran higher, shouting, "Fire! Fire below!" But the roar of the game, the cheers, the sound of people moving, swallowed up the warning. A half-burned cigarette butt, probably from a fan, fell through the cracks in the wooden floor and met years of dry trash. In less than 90 seconds, the fire spread with the wind, crawling under the seats like a hungry animal just escaped from a cage. Passers-by felt the heat sting their ankles. A woman screamed when she saw red flames suddenly rise from under the seats in the front row. From that moment on, the stands were no longer a place to watch football. It became a giant trap made of dry wood and corrugated iron. Smoke began to seep from the cracks in the wood. At first, just a thin layer of mist, but the burning smell startled many people. The wind blowing in from the field gave the fire oxygen, making it flare up more strongly. each stream of fire running zigzag under everyone's feet like fiery snakes. A piece of rotten wood suddenly turned into a torch, causing the entire row of seats to stand up in shock. Just a few dozen seconds later, the fire turned into a bright red strip running along the old wooden steps. The crackling of burning wood mixed with screams, the sound of wooden chairs being kicked away, and the cries of children. Those who understood what was happening immediately looked for a way out. But at that moment, the metal roof above began to heat up and make a ping ping sound, like an invisible warning that things were about to get out of control. A few players on the field looked up, their expressions changing from confusion to panic. From the audience, a column of black smoke had begun to roll up, thick and smelling of burning plastic. In the blink of an eye, a corner of the stands was a sea of fire, and no one thought about the game anymore, they only thought about running, as fast as they could, before the fire engulfed the old block of wood that had existed for more than half a century. Part 3: Wind of Fire. As the wind blew along the stands, the flames grew so strong that no one could believe it was just a small fire. The old wooden floor rotted as if doused with gasoline. The fire didn't just burn, it ran. And it ran faster than anyone could have imagined. Within 3 minutes, the flames had climbed up the backs of the seats, turning the stands into a sea of red. Thick black smoke billowed up, curling like black ribbons around the ceiling. Those in the front row tried to climb over the railings to get to the field, but the 6-foot-high metal fence blocked their path. They were trapped right in front of the flames, which rushed like an agitated beast. Some desperately tried to break the railings, others tried to climb on their friends to escape, forming a chaotic mass of people. The players turned to look, stunned. Some ran toward the stands, wanting to help, but the heat from the burning seats made them retreat. The TV commentator shouted into the microphone, "The stands are on fire! Evacuate now!" But by the time the words were out, the flames had already passed over their heads. The strong wind blowing in from the field turned the flames into a fire wind, a phenomenon that experts later described as a heat storm. It carried the flames along the length of the stands, spreading so fast that no one had time to react. The corrugated iron roof above began to glow red, curling as if it were melting. Wooden boards fell from the ground, bursting like firecrackers when they hit the ground. The speed at which the fire spread in Valley Parade was later described as a slow-motion explosion because it made no sound, but the heat was enough to turn the air into boiling liquid. Those trying to run in the narrow passage felt the heat on their faces, burning as if someone was holding a firecracker close to their skin. Every step they took was a race against time to survive. And above, the flames continued to race along the corrugated iron roof, rolling up like a red wave, ready to engulf the entire wooden structure that had stood for more than half a century in a few short minutes. Part 4: Fire Trap. On the main stand, there was only one real escape route, the narrow stairs leading to the back. But with hundreds of people running at once, the passageway became too small to contain them all. Black smoke poured down like nightfall from the ceiling, making it impossible to see the steps or the ground beneath their feet. The runners in front fell, dragging the long line behind them, turning the stairs into a deadly choke point. Some of the doors at the back of the stand were locked, a fear of sneakers. That sent many people running to the doors and back, frantically searching for another way out in the darkness and smoke. They pounded on the doors with their bare hands, their shoulders, with all their remaining strength, but the hinges wouldn't budge. When they realized that the path was not open, some people were forced to return to the old way, where the fire had spread like a red wall across. There were people trapped at the foot of the stairs, lying on top of each other, trying to push away the smoke, but in vain. The sound of coughing and pleading made the scene even more terrifying. Those standing near the entrance felt the heat on their faces as if someone were pressing a furnace against them. Outside, people jumped over the barricades and ran onto the grass, their clothes on fire, their hair burning in streaks. A player ran over, used his shirt to put out the fire on the back of a young fan, shouting, "Run! Just run!" The heat from the stands made the grass ripple under the fire, and screams echoed across the field, drowning out the referee's whistle and the loudspeakers. But not everyone was able to run. Many older people fell, trapped in the panicked crowd. Some young fans tried to pull them away, but their hands slipped from each other in sweat and ash. Above, the corrugated iron roof above so hot it felt like rubber began to fall off in chunks. The sheets fell with a dry roar, sweeping through the crowd like giant red-hot knives. In that moment, the entire Valley Parade grandstand ceased to be a sports facility. It became a giant furnace, and the people inside were desperately trying to catch their last breath. Part 5. 4 Fatal Minutes. Exactly 4 minutes after the fire first appeared, the Valley Parade main grandstand was engulfed in flames. Columns of smoke billowed into the sky, black as crude oil, so thick they blocked out the afternoon sun. The steel expanded from the heat, bucked, and then popped out of its joints, making dry clicks that echoed through the stadium like gunshots, signaling the impending collapse. Police and stadium staff rushed to save people, but as they got closer, the heat blasted out like an invisible wall, pushing them back. The temperature under the corrugated iron roof was estimated to be over 700 degrees Celsius, enough to melt paint, burn the air, and make it difficult for anyone standing nearby to breathe. Firefighters had to stand dozens of meters away to spray the hose, but the water evaporated immediately when it met the heat, turning into white columns of steam that billowed up and disappeared. Many young and old fans were trapped in the top row of seats, where flames poured down from the roof like a red waterfall. Some tried to run through the smoke but collapsed after just a few steps from inhaling the toxic fumes. At the back, locked doors became death traps. People banged on them, shouted, but the flames were faster than they could fight. At exactly 15:48, the entire roof collapsed. The sound of steel cracking was like the roar of a giant monster, and then the entire red-hot roof crashed down on the seats below, dragging dozens of people still trapped. A cloud of fire and hot ash shot up like a mini eruption, completely blocking everyone in the stadium's vision. A witness said, "I just saw 5 people run to the back door, and then they disappeared in the flames." No one could have prepared for what happened in just a few minutes. From a trophy ceremony, a match filled with laughter, to a fiery hell that no one could understand, let alone escape. Part 6. Rescue in the Smoke. The fire engines arrived within minutes, but by the time they set foot on Valley Parade, the flames were higher than the roof, billowing like a column of fire from a burning factory. The heat was so intense that many of the firefighters had to cover their faces and take a few steps back to avoid being burned by the heat. Burned wood fell like a rain of embers, leaving the grass on the field covered in black spots. The injured lay scattered on the field, some with burns all over their bodies but still trying to say their names, in the hope that someone would find their family. An old man was carried out into the field, his skin scorched but still mumbling, "My wife? Where is she?" Survivors later described the scene as a negative of hell. The screaming, the sound of steel bending, the crackling of fire, the smell of burning plastic and hair, I will never forget. The plastic wheels of the bleachers melted into a thick black stream, emitting white smoke. Beer cups, plastic bags, shoes, all turned into shiny black streaks on the grass. The heat caused the water from the hoses to evaporate as soon as it touched the firewall, creating white clouds of vapor that poured out like a thick fog. Despite their best efforts, the rescuers knew they were fighting something far beyond their ability to extinguish a giant furnace fed by rotting wood. Decades of dry trash, hundreds of plastic chairs, and a corrugated iron roof above that created a chimney effect so powerful it sucked the flames along the length of the bleachers. They had no hope of extinguishing the fire immediately, Their only task was to get as many people out as possible. In that sea of black smoke, each person was carried, helped, pulled out by all means. Every step on the ash-hot grass was a step to snatch life from the hands of the fire. But not everyone had time to wait to be rescued. Looking up at the burning stands, the firefighters could only tighten the hose, knowing that there were people who would never walk out of the disaster that afternoon. Part 7. The Hidden Truth. The next day, when the fire had died down and only thin wisps of smoke hung in the air, the truth began to emerge, and it was even more bitter than the ash that covered the field. The Valley Parade main stand had not suddenly caught fire. It had been warned to be dangerous for more than a decade. Reports in 1971, 1974, 1978, and 1981 all came to the same chilling conclusion. Rotten wooden floors, rubbish, accumulated under the stand's high risk of fire. Many engineers even used the word inevitable to describe the risk. But because of the huge repair costs, because the club was in financial trouble, and because the season always needed to continue, the upgrades were delayed. Each time there was a warning, another report was written. Each time there was a recommendation, it was set for end of season. And the end of one season slipped into the end of another for 15 years. The dropped cigarette butt was just the spark. The disaster had been built thousands of days before from the accumulation of indifference, lack of responsibility, and a football safety system accustomed to seeing risks as something to be done tomorrow. One investigator put it bluntly, it wasn't the fire that killed them, it was the indifference that killed them. The words left Bradford silent. Many of the victims' families wept as they read the inquest report, not just because of the loss of their loved ones, but because they knew that the death should never have happened. Bradford fans felt betrayed by the club's management and by a system that had allowed a rotting, trash-strewn stand with no proper exits, even in an era when English football considered itself civilized and professional. Amid the smoldering black ashes, a cold truth stood out. The disaster was no accident. It was the direct result of years of neglect of safety, and the price was 56 lives. Part 8. The Legacy. Valley Parade was rebuilt from the ground up, but the memory of the 56 people who died remains in every brick. Every time fans pass the new stand, they still unconsciously look down at the floor where 40 years earlier, a single cigarette butt had been enough to set the entire stadium ablaze. After the disaster, stadium safety laws in England changed radically. Wooden stands were banned, fire escape systems were expanded, walkways were required to be clear, and all clubs had to undergo rigorous fire safety inspections. Expenditures that had once been considered non-essential became mandatory. These changes not only saved hundreds of thousands of lives at subsequent matches, they shaped a new safety mindset for English football. For many years, there was no major stadium fire like Valley Parade, a testament to how tragedy, however devastating, can be a turning point in saving lives. Bradford holds a memorial service every year. The survivors, many of whom still bear scars on their hands, faces, or memories, stand silently beneath the small monument in the courtyard. The sounds of the city slow down for a few minutes. Candles flicker in the wind, trembling but not extinguished, as if to remind us that those 4 fateful minutes in 1985 must never be forgotten. And each time the memorial bell rings, we remember not just the fire that claimed 56 lives, but also the indifference, delay, and disregard for safety that fueled the disaster. Valley Parade's legacy is not just pain, but also a warning that football and everywhere else people gather never makes the same mistake again. Part 9. The Conclusion. The Bradford Stadium disaster is about more than fire. It is a story about people, about indifference, about systems that delay repairs, about warning reports left in drawers, and later decisions that accumulate into tragedy. A small cigarette butt and a pile of dry trash can turn a festive day into a day of mourning. Because when the environment is already on fire, it only takes a small mistake to create hell. The tragedy is a reminder that in public spaces, safety is not later, it is now. No grandstand, bridge, building, or tunnel has the right to ignore obvious warnings. No one can rely on luck to save human lives. Because sometimes it only takes 90 seconds for everything to collapse and enough to leave a generation with the memory of a sea of fire that never goes out. Bradford in 1985 left pain, but also a lesson. Life is always fragile, and safety must always come first.